Good morning, Opening Pathways viewers, or whatever time it is when you're watching this. I have a great guest today for you. I have Stan Gibson, and Stan is the principal and owner of Stan Gibson Speaks. He has a great background. We're going to learn about that today, and I have some wonderful questions so we can also get to know Stan better. Stan, welcome to the show.
Hey, Tom, glad to be here. Thanks for having me, my friend.
But we are thrilled to have you here. I'd love for you to give them, the little thumbnail of who Stan Gibson is. But what I really want to know is what sparked your idea to start Stan Gibson Speaks.
I love it, love it. Well, I'll tell you what, again, thanks for having me on here. I really appreciate it. So let me tell you, um, yeah, what sparked the idea? I can kind of answer both questions, with the same answer. I was in the corporate world for about 4 decades. So giving away a little age there, but so anyway, I was at a lot of Fortune 150s, Fortune 2s, and so anyway, it was a great ride. It was a lot of fun, and I was in the corporate real estate world, Tom, and I just it was a great ride to learn about leadership. I took a few sabbaticals to take on some entrepreneurial ideas that I had, which worked out really well. And so I just had this career. And the one thing I always tell people is I always have a plan B. And in fact, I've got a podcast called the Inspiration Podcast with Stan. And one of my episodes, in fact, one of the very first episodes, I talk about I always have a plan B. Because even though I was in the corporate world for almost 4 decades, it doesn't always end the way you think you want to. And I worked for a company that had over 300,000 employees. And being one of the executives, they came to me, Tom, they said, we're ready for another round of layoffs, and there was going to be like 30 or 40,000 layoffs. And so they had me go through the exercises that you go to when you're in big corporations. And I was pretty fortunate. I had some folks that in my department that were about ready for retirement. In fact, they were probably overdue, and they admitted that to me. And so it was going to be a welcome situation for them to walk in and say, hey, you know what, you got a package, you're going to be able to walk and all that good stuff. What I didn't realize was after I gave them the call, I got the call. And not only did I get the call, senior management had been not only, displaced my position, but also some of the other people on my team that I hadn't planned on. So that's just how the corporate world works.
Wow.
And the nice thing is, I always say, always have a plan B. But you know what, Tom? I had already, that was February 21st of 2021. At 8 o'clock the next morning, I mean, I had already been speaking on the circuit for over 15 years. I'd already had written a book called Living a Rich and Intentional Life. I already had a website for coaching and executive coaching and all the things that I do because I had already had a passion. And I'd already been working on a lot of these things for the past, 10 years plus. And I was coaching executives before and after work. I always called it my time, my dime. I always told them exactly what I was doing. But I just wanted to make sure that not only I enjoyed my job, Tom, I really did. But everybody's got to have that hobby, that passion. And for me, it was a plan B. And so that's how I kind of got into it. That was about 5 years ago, and it's really morphed into something extremely cool. And so that's my story, Tom, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah. I love this story. This moment in our careers, we have these, I know I had one, and it was interesting to me because I had to lay off about 160 people. I ran HR in a number of companies, and I had to lay off 160 people on my birthday, Stan. And I stayed around
Happy
with
birthday.
a skeleton group for a few weeks as we closed everything out. And then I was there by myself one day, and it was the day I was supposed to turn in the keys to the office, and I realized I needed to lay off myself. And that was really a weird feeling. But I, like you, had a plan B in mind. So I love this idea of having a plan B. Tell me this, Stan, since you started Stan Gibson Speaks, how are you fundamentally different? How did it change you?
Well, I don't think I have had anybody ask me that question, and that is a great question. Um, you know, I one time had a very senior boss, and he was getting ready to retire. And he said, you know what, Stan? He said, it takes 6 months to find my soul. And I thought, well, that's kind of an odd answer. And you know what? I know what he meant. it took me a while to kind of just, decompress, get out of, kind of that corporate mindset of, always trying to please, certain folks, and, trying to just, go from one meeting to the next. I literally, Tom, just decompressed, and it took me about 4 or 5 months, and I don't think I have been truer to myself than I ever have been in my life in the last
Right.
3 to 4 years. And it's just so much fun because it's if you can afford it. And I was in a position where, you know what, I was probably 2 or 3 years away from, wanting to retire anyway. So it didn't hit me out of left field where I had to panic. And that's the nice thing. And not all my clients are in that boat. However, it was for me. So yeah, I'm just able to
Yeah.
be me. And that's what I teach a lot of my clients is you got to be you.
Yeah. So I imagine there's a specific identity that you had to let go of in order to step fully into Stan Gibson Speaks. Yes?
Oh, you use the word identity, Tom. You're absolutely right. And that's where I work with a lot of clients. And I want, for those of you that are listening, to this, I just want you to imagine, you've probably been in a situation where you've been in the corporate environment, but what is your identity? What is your identity? And so, I have a pretty very specific process that I work with people. How do you want to show up? And I've got 5 areas in working with clients. And one is, yeah, your career, your job. It's important. How do you want to show up? What's your identity going to be? The second is, how about spirituality or purpose? How do you want to show up there in life? The third is relationships. How do you want to show up as a mother, as a father, as a parent, as a colleague? And the fourth is just your physical well-being. And I get into all the neuroscience of physical well-being. I love that stuff. I've been geeking on it for probably, a decade and a half. It's a big part of my book. But the physical well-being, how do you want to show up? Because you've got to have energy. What are your sleep habits? What are your fitness habits? What are your meditation, your visualization, your journaling habits? And the fifth one is mindset. So I work with everybody on their identity. What's the identity that you want to have? Because once you can create that identity, it isn't a place to get to, it's a place to come from. So it's not a fake it till you make it, but you've got to have an identity that you believe that you're walking and talking with that confidence right now in the present. And then once we go there, then we go into the strategies to reinforce it. Therefore I must. Therefore I must. So once you know your identity, therefore I must. And now we start creating 90-day strategies to reinforce that identity. And then the third component is to create either scripture or quotes or whatever you want to listen to that will reinforce your strategies and your identity. So once we've done that, I'm really proud of this program because I think it's one of the top programs in the country, and it's something that I've been able to develop through some trial error, a lot of reinvestment in myself, spent a lot of money just on really non-traditional coaches that have taught me a lot, my experiences coaching others. But one of the final things we do is then we record all this. We record our identity. We record our 90-day strategy. We record these scriptures and quotes. And every morning, Don, before we get out of bed, first thing we're listening to. We're
Yes.
listening to our identity. We're letting the reticular activator within the brain, which takes a lot of the elements from the subconscious to the conscious part of the brain. That's a big piece of our life. We spend 70% of our time in fear. We spend 90% of our time in the subconscious, unconscious, just drifting. And until you know your identity, until you know what you want to put in the prefrontal cortex and make intentional, that's when life starts to take off. That's when you start to be intentional about excelling in the key areas
Yes.
of your life. So that's a little bit of what I
Great.
do, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to shift from the business focus to learning more about you now.
Perfect.
I'm interested in knowing, you had this great corporate career, you've got your business now, and, most of us have really early role models when we're even kids that have had some impact on who we became on our journey in life. Who was that for Stan?
Wow, it's another great question, Tom. For me, I was always in athletics, and so whether I was in football, basketball, baseball, whatever I was in. But to me, it's just always, for me, it was a football coach in high school. It was that guy that just had that class. He just had that way about him that you just admire, you respect. He was so stable. So, he just never wavered. And so, I've had him as his name was Norm Henderson. I had Norm as one of the mentors. And then, when I do a lot of speaking, I talked Tom a lot about when I went into college. I played for a few years at a school called Eastern Illinois University. And, you talk about mentors. My first year, we went 1-10, voted one of the worst football teams in the United States. And so you don't keep your job when you do that. And they let the guy go. And then they brought in a guy by the name of Daryl Midra, known as Dr. Victory. And what I appreciated about him as a mentor was we went from 1-10 from another coach to national champions within 12 months. National champions. I mean, worst to first.
It's amazing.
But he did a few things, Tom. He came in, he was authentic. He came in and he said, I know very little about football. Now, what kind of confidence does that give you as a player that's coming off a 1-10 season? You get a brand new coach and he says, I know very little about football. In fact, I'm going to be sitting up in the press box because I'm going to let my coaches, I'm going to delegate a lot of the responsibilities to them. And you know what? You know who the real coach is going to be? Each and every one of you. Because when you're out there in the field, you're the ones that knows whether you're getting beat or you're beating the guy across from you. And if we don't know that, we can't make adjustments. And so, things like that, he was big into Aristotle and into Plato, into all these just these Greek, philosophers. So he knew more about life than he did about football. And he knew how to get the right people in the right slumber. So I always say I learned more my first 2 years of college about life than I did in a classroom just by watching this guy. So he was probably one of the mentors that, I admire and still talk about.
That's great. Tell me this. Where has life asked you to slow down recently? And what did you hear when it asked you to slow down?
Mm. I go at a very fast pace, Tom. And, one of my strengths is I'm what's called an activator. If you're familiar with Clifton Strengths Finders, but I think I was going so fast that I just slowed down. In fact, I was just telling somebody I was taking a pivot. I said, you know what? I'm gonna pivot and go to work with a few really good individuals, and I really love them to death. And in that time of slowing down and ramping up with two other individuals, I realized I really like what I was doing. Why did I pivot? And so while it's an amicable situation, I said, look, they want me to start a podcast with them. I said, look, I'll do that. That's fine. We can go ahead and do that. But I tell you what, just that time of kind of reducing the noise, and I got rid of a lot of overhead, and I was really starting over from scratch again. And it gave me a chance to reflect and look over the last 5 years of what's worked, what hasn't worked, read some books, think, and just be quiet and be still. And that's what's led me into what I think is the most exciting part of my life right now, that I'm just working with some executives, and it never would have happened had I not slowed down long enough to think about the future.
Interesting, isn't it? Tell me this. I'm as a great segue, you brought up pivoting. How does Stan know when to pivot or push through?
Mm. Boy, you've got some of the best questions, Tom. I tell you. Well, I'm a faithful person, so I ask God for a lot of guidance. I do have listening prayers. I do sit and listen every morning. I do have some pretty strict routines. Some of them not only faith-based but also journaling. Get my thoughts out on getting my thoughts out on the paper, and it again. That's another part of just slowing down, writing it out, staying out of the digital world just long enough to get your thoughts in a pen and pencil and get it on a piece of paper. Being able to kind of just write and think and reflect and slow down. So sometimes it's time to pivot and sometimes it's time to push through. And I think I pivoted a little too many times over the last 4 years, Tom. And now I can just the vision is there. And now it's time to push. And it just sometimes you have to pivot enough times to where it just had you not pivoted enough, you would know when it's time to push. And now it's time to push.
Great. Yeah. I was here on Maui, and Hawaii got really hit by some storms a few weeks ago. We actually have been getting them over and over again. But the power and internet went out here for 3 days, even after the batteries wore out. And it was interesting to me of having to ask myself what I was going to do with myself, because I'm so used to being engaged and either online or certainly in one of these rooms or working with clients, and literally was in the dark. And it was a great experience. I don't want to repeat it this week, but it was a great experience for checking in and remembering what it's like just to be with myself and what I would do with time when available and not scheduled. So it was a very learning experience. Tell me this, Stan. How has your relationship with risk changed as Stan Gibson's has grown here lately?
No, again, another great question. But risk is relative. I'm in a season of life, Tom, where um, I guess I could start to take it more easy. It's not who I am. It's just not who I am. I've got some real estate investments that are probably a little more than probably one should take on at this stage in life. But to me, it's what gets me up in the morning. And I think you've got to have just enough risk in your life to where it strikes the dopamine and the serotonin and all the neurotransmitters. Because I think if you go too far into just, again, I hate the word retirement. I always tell people congratulations on refocusing. I never say the word retirement. In Japan, there is no word for retirement. As you probably know, it's ikigai, which is a reason to wake up in the morning. And so to me, that's what I need is a reason to wake up in the morning. And there's a certain amount of risk that I need to take on that just energizes me. And I don't think, when we talk about risk, are we shoving all of our chips in the middle of the table, or are we just shoving in enough to where it would hurt, but it wouldn't devastate? For me, that's risk. Shoving in enough to where it would hurt, but it wouldn't devastate, and it keeps me engaged. And then the process. The process is more fun than probably whatever you win at the end. Just going through it, learning, meeting new people, going through certain emotions of good and bad. So for me, as long as you're not shoving it all in the middle, and some people do that, I shove enough in to make it hurt, but only enough to where it's going to stimulate me. Again, it gives me that ikigai, that reason for waking up in the morning.
Yes, yes. I like to say I retired being retired to be inspired.
Oh, there
I
you go.
tried that little retirement game, and it wasn't really for me. I had too much to share, too much I wanted to engage in, and I had too much to do. So I'm with you on that. Tell me this, what did last year strip away and you're grateful it's gone?
You know, Again, I really get into a lot of self-assessments, not only with my clients, but myself. Again, know who you are and know who you're not. And last year, I knew because if anybody follows the Enneagram, it's, there's 9 different numbers and it's really a fantastic assessment. But as an Enneagram 7, what that means is I'm sensitive to pain. So future is always a little more sexier to me than the reality of the current. Well, 2 things. My mother was failing. She's one of my best friends, and I knew that her time to transition was pretty close by. And my wife is diagnosed with cancer back in 2018, and so we've dealt in and out of remission all along. So dealing with that reality was something that I had to really strip away. I had to create this new identity, and we talked about identity earlier. And last year was that year of embracing a new identity. And so for me, the pain is inevitable. Suffering is a choice. And so I had to show up differently. And so as an identity, I embrace all seasons of life, including living, dying, death, and living in eternity with Jesus Christ. That's my personal identity. That is something I had to take on last year, Tom. That is something that I took on mentally with strategies to go ahead and reinforce a new way of showing up. So that's what I stripped away. I've stripped away some old ways of showing up
Mm.
in order to show up differently and more effectively as I deal with reality versus passing it off for future events that look so much sexier.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've had a few mistakes in my career that turned out to be or lead to some of my biggest successes. Have you ever had a mistake that turned out to lead to a success?
Oh, gee, where do we want to start? I think we all have mistakes. We don't have mistakes. We're not pressing the flesh. We're not working hard enough. So, I guess, if I look, and again, maybe this goes back to the pivot question that you asked. And, I've had plenty of mistakes. And I wouldn't really call them mistakes. I would just call them learning experiences. When I was with a Fortune 500 as an entrepreneurial mind, yeah, I approached my boss and I said, why don't we lift out 150 employees out of the company, start our own company, see if they'll hire us back. And it was just a perfect opportunity. They were going public. They didn't need a non-core business. And I said, well, let's take this non-core business, let's start it ourselves. And, we'll add other clients. And again, first 2 or 3 years worked out beautifully, just beautifully. Well, then, things start to happen. And, some of the morals and the values that, you went in with, you see some of the, people start to extract those and it wasn't working like it was supposed to. And that was a time when I was really excited because that was my idea. That was my brainchild. And I didn't have the political capital necessarily to pull it off by myself. It took my boss at the company who became the CEO. But then I had to make a decision. Is this really where I want to be? Is this the legacy that I want? And so that wasn't really a mistake, but it was a learning lesson that I had to step away from something that I really felt I had an identity with because it's something I started and it was very successful, but it just wasn't the morals and the values and it wasn't going where I wanted in life. So, I took a different route. I pivoted. And fortunately, I had, a large organization come to me looking for a real estate director. And it was good timing. But there's probably several situations like that, Tom, where I had to pivot. And you can call them mistakes or we can just say, you know what, it was a good learning experience. I took a lot from it in my coaching today. I pulled from so much experience and stuff like that that it's just amazing when you look back and you think they're mistakes and they're just coaching experiences for somebody else eventually.
Yes, I agree with that. So tell me this, how do you recognize when fear is information versus a stop sign?
When fear is information, um, I really believe that, uh, again, I think we go back to risk. If you're not in fear, you're probably not either being asked the right question or asking the right question because you need to go deep enough. And sometimes it's a matter of when I think of fear, Tom, I think of not only what information are you taking, but how deep are you going with that? I mean, are you asking two and three more questions? How deep are you going with what was put in front of you that looks like fear? And are you asking what next? What else? What am I missing? And are you asking all the right questions to take it from fear to where it either goes to opportunity or it goes to disaster? So, what appears to be front end loaded questions about fear, I don't think it's until you really peel it back deep enough to where you know whether it's going to be opportunity or whether it's something you just need to toss
Yeah.
by the side of the road and walk away.
Yeah, I've learned something about fear. And I think it's true also for the dreaded imposter syndrome that we hear about so much, and so many people have written books. And I think both of them are just simply opportunities for growth.
Yeah,
So many opportunities for growth.
they say 68% of all executives and CEOs have imposter syndrome. You would know from your HR background just how accurate that is, but I do believe that there's a lot to be said there. I think a lot of people are walking around with that fear of being found out, and so I agree. Yeah, I think it's healthy
Yeah,
to at
yeah,
least acknowledge it.
yeah. Look what's underneath it. Tell me this. What impact are you most proud of? But I'm not interested in professionally or publicly. Personally, what impact are you most proud of?
I just want to leave a legacy. I'll leave a legacy as I mean, I've been married for 44 years and met my wife in third grade. So, you don't make it through 44 years without, the good, the bad, everything in between. But, I know that leaving a legacy personally, as a husband, as a father, as a I go by grandstand, by the way. So, as a grandstand, two twin young boys, the relationships I've made. One thing that I believe, I think we all need to kind of know who we are and who we're not. But one of the identities that I have is I'm a visionary encourager. And I just have vision, but I also encourage. And so I think this legacy that just this total picture, Tom, of a legacy of, who I am personally, but also just this, I think if people were to show up to my funeral, I feel comfortable and confident, and I'm very happy about just being there at times when people needed encouragement, they needed picked up, they needed vision, they needed clarity. And so that's just one of the gifts that God gave me. And so I think that's the most important thing is I use what God gave me.
Yeah, yes, yes, yes. What boundary has become essential to your sustainability?
What boundary? Uh, you know, I'm big into routines because again, I'm big into intentionality. But I think when you talk about boundaries, I think of maybe this isn't the question you're answering, but I think about digital boundaries. I think about how easy it is today to get lost in society. Just the chaos. I had a great lunch the other day with a coach who works with executives and pro athletes, but he worked with them because of their addiction to pornography and to alcohol and drugs. And we were just talking about the phone. We were talking about the digital world that we live in today. We were talking about the situation that people are in today is so different than it was even 10 years ago, 20, 30 years ago. And we just talked about, I said, well, how do we go about changing it? Because again, there's no regulation around anything anymore. And he said, we just got to start working with children when they're small. We got to start working with people and educating them. And so for me, my boundaries, I believe in that. I think the boundaries you have to start teaching people and incorporating yourself. What boundaries do you have around social media? What boundaries do you have around, just being consumed by artificial intelligence? And there's just so many dangers out there. You've got to have some self-imposed boundaries.
Mhm, mhm. Have you ever said no to growth because it wasn't aligned?
I don't know that I have, Tom. Yeah, it's a good question. I'm sure I have because I'm just an intuitive guy. I know when it feels right and I know when it doesn't. And sometimes it's passive aggressive and I will walk away from things. But I don't know that I can pull to that specific situation. But I will tell you, I think that's a great question because it goes back to probably your boundaries. But do you know who you are and do you know who you're not? Do you know what your core values are? And I would say that, for as much as I make mine, faith, respect, and responsibility, those are my three core values. I do try to make sure that anything that I'm asked to do, is it consistent with my faith? Is it something that they're going to respect me? And likewise, I'm going to respect them. And am I being responsible? And am I going to do what I say I'm going to do? Everybody's got to have their core values. But for me, I think those are mine. And If it doesn't match up with those three, I think just intuitively, I just know when to walk. I just know when to walk.
Okay. Good, good, good. Um, Tell me this, how do you balance being a leader and a learner?
I, I just take the opposite view. I don't think there is a balance. I don't think you look at one or the other. To me, if you quit learning, you quit leading. If you quit leading, you quit learning. I don't know that I would ever separate the two. I believe so much in learning. Uh, I don't care what season of life you're in. I don't care if you're in your 80s or 90s. You quit learning. It's just it's. I just think it's I think it's the apex of life. I think it's the foundation of life, Tom. So I don't think that there's a difference, nor would I ever advocate one.
Yeah, I'm a lifelong learner. I often say that on my last breath, I'll say, just one moment, I have a question.
Well, it'd be a good one. I know that.
What's your boldest vision for what comes next?
Well, I have again really transformed. I think for me, I'm naturally one that just loves to help people, and I had come to the realization, Tom, that not everybody wants it. Everybody wants to be good. Nobody wants to put in the work. Really, I mean, there's about 5%. I call it the people that want to go from great to greater. There are a lot of people that want to go from good to great, but they're not willing to put in the time. So to me, my bolder vision is I'm working with somebody right now to make sure that I truly have the boundaries you were talking about. And while I will love everybody, purposely, intentfully that I meet, I'm really looking for just those 5% of those people that really want to leave a legacy. I'm working with two types of people right now. They're either gassed, they want to pivot, they're burned out, they want to go from chaos to clarity, or everything's working great in their life. They say, you know what? In order to leave a legacy, I got to go from great to greater. To me, so that's where I'm really focused right now, and that's probably just about 5% of the population, unfortunately. So for me, it's walking away from a lot of the other situations where I would just intuitively want to stick around and see if I could help. And it wasn't a good use of their time. It wasn't a good use of mine. I'm looking for those people that are all in.
So, what does renewal look like for Stan beyond the typical day off or just resting?
Oh boy, I think you got to have something to look forward to. For me, renewal, it's probably comes in 3, 4, 5, 6 month increments. I think it's just having something to look forward to, something to look forward to with my wife. I know that, this year she challenged me a little bit to, cross off some bucket list type things. I'm going golfing in Scotland in about a month and a half. And, just having things to look forward to, Tom, is just, that's renewal because it isn't the golfing in Scotland that's probably going to be the renewal. It's the anticipation, it's the research, it's the watching programs about the Royal Mile. It's the euphoria that you feel and getting up there. So to me, like after that's over, what's next? What's
Yeah.
I just think life is one big renewable what if and next step and hey, shouldn't we try and have we thought about?
I agree. I think that planting seeds for things in the future is so important that we have something to look forward to and something to gear ourselves up and get charged up for. And I work with so many people that forget to do that, forget to take off a little time for renewal and end up often near burnout or in it and don't recognize it coming or disliking what they're doing. And it's not because of what they're doing, it's because of how they're behaving in their own life. So tell me this, if a very, 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 very young Stan were watching this podcast, what would you tell him?
Don't get discouraged. I think we all go through seasons of life. And I look at some of the seasons I was in, probably, in my 20s, maybe my 30s, maybe my 40s, and there's probably do-over. There's things that whether it be as a husband, whether it be as a father, whether it be as a businessman. But you know what? Now that I get to the season of life I'm in now, I look back and I say this was all for a reason. Everything was for a reason. And you know what? Nobody's perfect. And had you not made some of those mistakes, had as long as you're able to keep true to yourself, and as long as you're able to pivot back and kind of, get back into, between the guardrails on the road, I just think, you know what, just never get discouraged. Just live life, live it to the fullest, live it every bit you can, no matter what. I enjoy working with so many millennials, so many Gen Zs, so many emerging leaders, because you can just sit there and you can watch them and you can just see the frustration. Tom, you and I were there. We were in their shoes at one point in time, and you can just see that curiosity, that doubt, that what's next. And so I would just say, you know what? Just hang with it. Just be curious. Just continue to know that there's another season right around the corner, and you're going to learn from the season behind it. And as I look, I just multiply probably the 7, 8, 9 seasons of life I've been in, and I just say, God, I'm glad I didn't miss out on any. I didn't enjoy some of them as much as the others. They they all made me who I am today. So always just
Yeah.
keep striving, one more season after the next.
Love that. Stan Gibson, principal owner of Stan Gibson Speaks. Thank you for being on Opening Pathways today. Tell us where we can find you, Stan.
I'll tell you what, if you would just go to leadwithstan.com, leadwithstan.com. If you go there, what I've got is I've got a couple of great little tools for your leadership that have to do with a lot of, fitness and well-being, and it's all the neuroscience and resources. And anyway, I'd love to give it to you. If you've been listening and you've hung with us this long, go to leadwithstan.com and I'll get them out to you. Get them out to you right away. So anyway, Tom, thank you. You asked some wonderful questions, my friend. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed this. Really thoughtful.
Great. Thanks for being here, Stan. And to my viewers, this is Tom Lenoble. I'll see you next time.